Hi guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video is going to be my January wrap up. Now for the month of January, I was actually able to read 10 books, which I'm so pleased with. And on top of me reading like a good amount of volume for me personally, the books I read this month I really enjoyed. All from very different genres, but I feel like each one has stayed with me for its own reason. So nevertheless, I'm so excited to actually film this wrap up today. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. Beginning of this month, I won't lie, was very much sectioned off for one of my faves, Brandon Sanderson. If you haven't heard, Brandon Sanderson is basically releasing 4 secret project books throughout the entirety of this year. On January 1st of this year, he actually released his first secret project, which will also be available to buy for the general public, I think in like March or April. That being said, I will have timestamps for this video, so if you want to skip the review of the first secret project, go ahead and do so. But without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start talking about Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. I loved this book. First and foremost, like structurally, the style of the story is just my kind of fantasy. This is also a Cosmere novel, and I feel like Brandon Sanderson actually packed a lot of like Cosmere world building within this, with the narrator, with just like introducing us to certain concepts. It was such a fantastic read, and it has really set the tone, I feel like, at least personally, for the rest of the secret projects that are coming out. But this is a story following our main character, Tress. Tress lives on a planet very different from our own, and she actually resides on an island. Here, she is rather content with her life. She has someone she loves. She's really close with her family, but it is important to note that the government actually prevents anyone from moving off this island, as it's kind of like an important trading post. The sea that surrounds this island is not actually made of water, but instead spores. In this fantasy world, there are different types and different colors of spores, and when these things interact with water, they have a very extreme reaction. Spores are very dangerous, and the people that live here have kind of evolved to deal with them in different ways. For example, green spores that make up the ocean surrounding Tress's home, when water interacts with them, they basically have huge, spontaneous, vine-like growth. At the beginning of the story, though, Tress's life is turned upside down when the person she loves most is basically taken to a very evil place, so she decides to set off on an adventure herself to try to save him. This book is amazing. First and foremost, it's actually told from a narrator's point of view, like a storyteller's point of view, and the narrator is fantastic. They constantly break the fourth wall. They're also a very known character to us, providing, again, excellent world building and just really wonderful like audience engagement. This book is very much written like a classic quest fairy tale. Tress as a main character is fantastic. This book is so whimsical. Like, I didn't realize I needed a whimsical fantasy book by Brandon Sanderson, but now that I have it, I need more. It had such a touch of whimsy and humor. It was so delightful and heartwarming, with still like a really fantastic and engaging fantasy plot. I loved this book. It was everything I could have possibly wanted, and I had literally no idea what to expect when I picked this book up. There were so many wonderful messages throughout the story. It was just great. Honestly, the more I sit with it, the more I love it. It's just a style of writing and fantasy that really speaks to me, and I would give it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. From there, I had a bit of a Brandon Sanderson bug, and I had to read more of his books, so I decided to continue my reread of Mistborn Era 2. I was supposed to only read the second book in Mistborn Era 2, which is The Shadow of Self, but I got so addicted to the story, and I just love the audiobook so much that I also listened to book 3, which is Bands of Mourning. This reread has just been so excellent. Mistborn Era 2, I just think, is such a blast. It's a flintlock fantasy, and it follows 2 of our main characters, Wax and Wayne, who are kind of like vigilante detectives. We're first introduced to them as they live in a wild west sort of area, but we see Wax, one of our main characters, have to move back to the city to take on his lordly duties, but of course he's drawn back into crime. The first book is just okay, but starting in book 2 and especially going into book 3, the plot really expands, and Brandon Sanderson really taps into the lore and the history of the Mistborn world, creating just a fantastic like secondary plot line in the future that works so well. There's such humor, there's such great character growth, and I especially love the characters Tress and Merce. Audiobooks are truly incredible and just like kept me laughing out loud. I was equal parts entertained and just could not stop laughing. They're just so funny, especially Wayne. And I just feel like the narrator of these books does such a great job bringing these characters to life. I loved this, and I can officially say I'm ready to pick up the Lost Medal any day now. It will be happening. But honestly, I would give like Shadow of Self 4.5 and Bands of Mourning 5 stars. These books were an absolute blast. loved them. After my spiral down a Brandon Sanderson reading hole, I also picked up Exit West by Mohsin Hamid. This was one of the top books I wanted to read this year, and also just in general part of my goal of reading more literary fiction throughout 2023. And wow, was this story just so unbelievably incredible. It's a literary fiction story, but it also has hints of magical realism, and this touch of fantasy works so well on expanding the metaphor of immigration, which is very much centered in the story. In this story, we follow our main characters Nadia and Saeed, and they meet in the city that they were raised in and kind of begin to date and sort of perhaps fall in love. The relationship, though, begins to blossom on the brink of a very dangerous civil war, and as conflict begins to rise, they become much closer. And they also begin to hear rumors of these magical doorways that once you cross their barrier, it transports you to another location somewhere else in the world, and they decide to basically take this plunge together and step through this doorway. This book is so unbelievably intimate, and throughout it you're reading from the perspectives of both Nadia and Saeed. You see their journey of just two young people falling in love and then having to deal with the impossible conflict that surrounds them, throwing their lives in absolute disarray, and you just can't help but to feel unbelievably unfair the entire situation is. They should be focusing on their jobs, possibly dating and having a good time, but instead they're trying to figure out how they're going to survive, where they're going to get food from, the impossible choice of leaving their family behind and creating new roots and a new life entirely. I also really appreciated how the author documented their relationship through time, and also the wax and wane of intimacy. Also how the author illustrates the different types of leaving and how you can desperately hold on to someone and they can be more representative of the past and necessarily your ideal future. And I just feel like these two characters in this book absolutely sung. Nadia and Saeed, reading from their points of view, you just felt so nestled in their lives and their history and their dreams and their desires. And again, I feel like the fantastical elements of this book were just so well done. These magical doorways, again, which was ultimately a stand-in for immigration. This book was just fantastic, an absolute necessary pickup if you haven't read it already like me. I waited way too long to read this book. This was definitely a 5 out of 5 stars. Absolutely incredible, so impactful. For sure, one of the best books I've read so far this year. I know it's only January, but I feel like this is going to have a lot of longevity with that statement. Next up, I read one of my most anticipated releases for honestly the past couple of years, and that is Hellbent by Leigh Bardugo. I do have a reading vlog documenting this entire process. If you're curious to watch it, I'll leave it linked down below. This, of course, is the long-awaited sequel to Ninth House, which was one of my favorite books when I read it a few years ago. This is like a thriller, occult, dark academia-esque story, and in it we follow our main character Alex. And Alex is basically presented a second chance at life in a hospital room in LA. This second chance at life is basically to become a student at Yale, attend classes, be obviously a normal young woman, but also take on a very strange job. And this job is basically to join an organization which keeps track of and also checks on all of these secret societies that exist on the Yale campus. There's actually a significant amount of power that exists here, and these secret societies knowingly or unknowingly sort of try to tap into that. So she's basically forced to attend all of these events full of pompous and rich and privileged people and ensure they basically just don't destroy society and the city itself while performing their silly little rituals. However, though, in book 1, Alex's world is sort of turned upside down. Murder happens near campus and Alex begins to investigate. Book 1 was fantastic. It ended on quite the cliffhanger, so obviously I was really looking forward to picking up book 2, and this did not disappoint. I don't know if I loved it as much as book 1, but this was still so captivating. Alex as a main character just roots this story so well. She's so rootable, but she's also incredibly complex and dynamic given all of the different trauma she's experienced throughout her life. This series has so many different trigger warnings, so that is something I do want to call out if you're interested in reading this book. But I really liked how this book expanded on a lot of the ritualistic aspects of book 1. This book is obviously called Hellbent, and there's lots of references to hell itself. And I do feel like Leigh Bardugo did a great job explaining a lot of these different like religious iconography moments. I don't know a lot about religion, I'm not gonna lie, but I felt like Leigh Bardugo did a great job like painting the picture. And structurally too, how this book is written, we have flashback chapters and then obviously these really quick paced chapters in the present, creating just a lot of urgency and again, creating an environment where you don't want to put this book down. I also really enjoyed a lot of the growth we experienced in this book, particularly with Alex and her relationships. She was able to kind of rely and lean on a lot more characters in this installment, which I just really appreciated seeing, and it also added like more characters to enjoy and fall in love with as well. This book just has such a great setting. I mean, you have a classic fall university vibe, you have terrible people, great people you want to root for, creepy magic, and a mystery at its core. I will say the mystery reveal, looking back, should have felt so obvious to me. Like, I almost feel dumb that I didn't guess it, but I will say I can't hold it against the book because I didn't guess it. But nevertheless, I really enjoyed book 2. I'm curious to see where the series is going to take us next. And I would give this like a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Not quite a 5-star, but still one I really enjoyed. Next book I read, oh my gosh, was just so good, and that is Nemesis Games by James S.A. Corey. This is the 5th book to the Expanse series, a series I talk about a lot on my channel, so I will try to keep it as brief as I can, but this book was just amazing. So the Expanse series is a space opera series. It's multi-POV, set in a political situation where humanity has expanded beyond the boundaries of Earth. So there's Earth, Mars, the Moon, and also a series of space stations called the Belt. All of these governments hate each other. There's lots and lots of tension, which is sort of introduced to us in book 1. One of our main characters is named James Holden. He is a ship captain, he has a crew, and he's always finding himself in the midst of all of these various conflicts. But throughout this series, you also have lots and lots of characters sort of introduced to you book over book with very different, very intense scenarios that you're working through, which has always kept this series just so unbelievably entertaining. But what was so cool about book 5 is we actually really just focused on James Holden and his crew, but they were very dispersed from one another. And there were so many plot lines that were insanely intense. And I feel like book 5 really was working to set the stage for like later installments in this series. This book was amazing. For the first time, I really felt connected to everyone. I really felt like James S.A. Corey was really working on sort of filling in all of the blanks for the characters to make you feel fully connected to them. We got so much backstory and just emotional connection that I felt like was so necessary and finally has brought this series to like the next level, because I've always felt some of the characters have felt flimsy, but I'm finally kind of like past that, if that makes sense. This particular installment had so much stuff to like rip your heart out. There was just so many things explored within this that I can't talk about in any specific detail because of spoilers, but I loved book 5 so much. By far my favorite book in the series, and I really had so many satisfying moments of like connection and bringing certain characters together too. It just felt like it had a lot of payoff for a lot of the storylines we followed throughout the first 4 books. Needless to say, I will be reading book 6 very, very soon because this was just one of the best books I've read. It was absolutely captivating. I could not put it down. Truly obsessed with this. 5 out of 5 stars. Speaking of books I am just unbelievably obsessed with, I wasn't kidding. January was a great reading month. I also have Age of War by Michael J. Sullivan. This is the 3rd book to the Legends of the First Empire series, but it's important to note that this 6-book fantasy series is kind of broken up into 2 trilogies. So this is kind of the end to the first act, and wow, was it just fantastic. Emotional, so well written, just everything about it was a 10 out of 10 for me. My favorite in the trilogy so far. I was rocked to my core. To say I was crying was an understatement. I'm still sort of dealing with the aftermath of this book, if I'm being honest. But if you're not familiar, the Legends of the First Empire series is a prequel series by Michael J. Sullivan, and it's set in like an ancient fantasy landscape. It essentially follows 3 groups of people. First we have the humans, then we have an elven group and a dwarven group, but it primarily is focused on the conflict between elves and humans. And at the beginning of book 1, you realize that human civilization is very much at the beginning. It's a cluster of small villages, and people are really just focusing on surviving the next winter. They also view this powerful other group of individuals almost like gods, but everything is thrown upside down when a human actually kills one of the elves, or the Fray as they're called in this book. This sort of creates a spark of a long simmering conflict, as the Fray cannot let this act of aggression go unanswered, and the humans are not wanting to be put back in their place, and they themselves are kind of looking to take their own place for themselves in this world. And so begins a trilogy that was just so freaking good. Everything sort of culminates within this story. First and foremost, I'll say the ancient setting is just fantastic. Throughout each installment, there's so much discovery, and you kind of see the progression of human civilization be made, from the discovery of like writing to certain metals to tools, something as simple as the pocket. Like, so many things are like stumbled upon and then added within the lore, and I feel like that element of this book is just really, really interesting. This installment was very military focused. The entire trilogy is leading up to what you know is going to be some type of conflict, and this is the book where the conflict sort of unravels. And I have to just give it to Michael J. Sullivan. His writing to describe this battle was meticulous and so well done. I feel like oftentimes when I read like battle scenes, it can very quickly feel chaotic, which often can be purposeful because war itself is very chaotic. But Michael J. Sullivan took the approach of really describing the different military strategies and the movements of what was going on. It really gave me like Two Towers vibes in a lot of ways. There were sieges, the battle took place over multiple days. Just seeing the different acts of this battle unfold was just incredible, and I was on the edge of my seat. This book had so many emotional character moments. Again, you fall in love with everyone present in this book, and the payoff of everything was just excellent. As a final novel kind of capping off again an arc of a story, it was just so good. I feel like final books for me personally tend to be the weakest, but this was not the case with this. 5 out of 5 stars, amazing. I've already bought book 4. I'm really not sure where the story is going to take us next, but this was just 10 out of 10. The next book I read was Bunny by Mona Awad, a very, very popular, very, very strange, like dark academia, horror, occult story. Going into this, I felt it was like a very divided response. I feel people either loved it or they hated it. This book feels very much like an A24 movie, if I'm being honest. It was a very strange ride, but one I kind of enjoyed from beginning to end. I do have an upcoming vlog with this book, so if you want more specific reactions, be sure to keep an eye out for that. But this story is essentially set in the very prestigious University of Warren. Here we follow a group of women who are all part of the graduate program for writing. Our main character is named Samantha, and the other students in this program all call themselves Bunny. They are this group of hyper feminine women that are a part of some sort of clique. They like all things glittery, they like all things cute, they like all things miniature, and again, they only refer to each other as Bunny. It's like very Heathers-esque in that way. In this story, Samantha loathes them. She has a very close friend, and they sort of hate them together. But at the beginning of the new semester, the Bunnies invite Samantha to come to a study group with them, so she decides to partake, and so just spirals a book that feels very quickly like it's going completely out of control. I don't really want to say much about this story because I feel like the experience of this story is reading it with knowing absolutely nothing about it, because it's just so audacious. It is bloody, it is gory, it is weird. It's kind of like a car wreck you don't want to take your eyes off from. I feel like you could also spend a lot of time dissecting a lot of the imagery and the symbolism of this story. Personally speaking though, just from a pure, like, did I enjoy it standpoint? The answer is yes. I don't regret reading this book. I feel like it's going to be one that I'll be gnawing at for a long time, which has a lot of irony in that sentence. But I have to give it to Mona Awad. The writing style was also perfect. It almost just felt like a fever dream the entire time you were reading it. The stylization of everything, you felt just as like pulled in and confused as our main character. And it was great. It was weird. I still don't even know how to rate this book, maybe like a 3.75, 4 stars, but it was a journey for sure. Like, I enjoyed it quite a bit. The next book I read was so unbelievably heartwarming. If you're looking for something that's going to make you happy, you just simply need to read this book because it was stunning. It was just truly stunning. And the book I'm talking about is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Madana. This book was just so good. It will just capture your heart. It will make you smile. It'll make you laugh. It'll make you cry. And in the story, we follow our main character, Mika Moon, and she is a witch. She is from the UK, and she's been sort of raised her entire life in isolation because as a witch, essentially they're told that they should, one, not really hang out with other witches because their power intensifies, kind of drawing the attention of other humans. And then obviously she has a harder time hanging out with regular humans because she has to hide so much of herself. Mika's free time, she does upload YouTube videos where she pretends to be a witch, and she feels very strongly that no one will be able to notice that she actually has real magic, until one day she receives a very strange message, an invitation to go to a place called the Nowhere House and become a teacher to 3 young witches. She is very confused. She's not so sure this is even real, but she decides to take a chance, travel to this place, and see about this possible opportunity. Initially, Mika Moon is very hesitant because, again, she's been raised her entire life to not congregate around magic. And then obviously seeing these 3 young witches, she knows it could possibly be dangerous, but she decides to ultimately take the job. It begins Mika becoming a magical teacher, living at this beautiful, adorable cottage. There's so much found family within this story. And there's also a grumpy librarian romance as well. This book was just so cute. I can't say enough good things about it. I was delighted by it immediately, and the voice of Mika Moon just absolutely shined within this. Honestly, just every element was perfect, from our main character to the romance plot line to just her becoming nestled within this family situation which she's never had before, getting closer to these young witches, and like everyone learning to love and trust each other. It was amazing. On top of that, it also had really cool magic, like how the magic worked, how Mika explained how magic worked was just amazing. I loved it. I listened to the audiobook, which was also exceptional. Again, if you want something that's just going to put a smile on your face, you have to read this. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. New comfort read for me. I feel like I'm going to be rereading this book a lot. It was so delightful. It was so cute. And the last book I read for this month was actually the book club pick for Monica and I's podcast, which is The Cozy Club. And the book is The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. This is a cozy murder mystery-esque story, and the plotline of this book, and it's basically set in a retirement village in the UK, and you follow this group of friends who basically every Thursday meet to try to solve like unsolved cold cases. They're just kind of obsessed with murder and all the like. So they're thrilled when a real live murder case drops on their doorstep locally, and they themselves kind of get involved in the investigation and begin working with the police to try to solve what is going on. This is like a classic murder mystery story, but with a twist. First, I would say the strongest part of this story are the characters. I loved the cast of the older characters from the retirement village. First off, I feel like there are not many stories kind of centering older individuals. Not only were these characters fun, funny, and seizing their own lives, there was also a lot of like deeper topics of life after retirement, when society kind of tries to move past you and no longer tries to take you very seriously. Also the dealing of the loss of a partner or a close friend. And you see all of these characters kind of grapple with those topics in different ways. Particularly our main characters, I would say, are Joyce and Elizabeth. And you see them kind of grow closer and form this fantastic friendship throughout the mystery of this book. I feel like all of their stories were so endearing and lovable and had so many like bittersweet elements to it. And that for sure was like my favorite element of this book. The second element obviously is going to be the different murder mysteries, and there's not just one. There are so many different mysteries sort of presented throughout this entire story. So many different threads that you're not quite sure how they could possibly be connected, and seeing how things sort of come together, in my opinion, was pretty satisfying. There are a lot of red herrings in this book, but I thought it was all playfully done. By no means did I think this book was perfect. There are a few topics that I just don't know were handled personally with like enough care, or really like dived into enough for the frequency that was present within the story. I feel like if you've read it, you might know what I mean. That being said, though, this is the first book in a series, and I would be interested to see how this wonderful cast would be solving further murders in the future. But it was humorous, it was fun, while also like very dark, because this is a murder mystery, and I felt like it sort of walked that line rather successfully. That being said, I would give this book like a 3.75 out of 5 stars. Alrighty guys, those are all the books I read for the month of January. Please let me know down below some books you've loved that you've read recently, as I would love to know, and I will see you soon with another video soon. Goodbye!